What does it feel like to stand on the edge of defeat, only to realize the fall could lift you higher than you've ever been? Pam Bondi was about to find out. She walked into Courtroom C in Tampa with a steady heartbeat and a fire in her chest that no one could see. Not yet. This wasn't just another case on her docket, though it wore the mask of routine. It was a proving ground, a quiet crucible where the weight of justice would either crush her or forge her into something unshakable. Pam didn't know it then, but the next few hours would ripple beyond these walls, a testament to what happens when courage meets an unyielding soul. She carried herself with the kind of grace that comes from years of staring down chaos and bending it to her will. Pam Bondi wasn't just a lawyer, she was a believer. In the law, yes, but more than that, in the idea that truth could still carve a path through the thickest fog of power. Her briefcase was heavy with notes, precedents, and the kind of meticulous preparation that had earned her a reputation as a force of nature. She'd faced judges who loomed like giants and walked away with their rulings in her favor. Today, she told herself, would be no different. The air buzzed with the hum of expectation as she settled at the defendant's table, her posture a silent declaration, I am ready. Before the gavel even struck, she'd gathered her team, 3 sharp-eyed assistants who'd become her extended family in the trenches of legal battles. They huddled in a small office down the hall, a pre-game ritual born from trust and shared purpose. This isn't about winning, she'd said, her voice low but alive with conviction. It's about reminding them what the law stands for. Her team nodded, their faith in her as steady as her own. She handed out assignments. Cross-check this statute, pull that case file, her mind a conductor orchestrating a symphony of strategy. They weren't just preparing for a hearing, they were arming themselves for a fight they didn't yet know was coming. And Pam? She thrived in that space, where the stakes were high and the odds were hers to shift. Courtroom C was a familiar arena, its wooden benches and hushed murmurs a backdrop to her countless victories. She adjusted her notes, her fingers tracing the edges of pages she'd memorized, her mind already 3 steps ahead. Across the room, the city attorney fidgeted, his unease a faint ripple in the stillness. Pam didn't notice. Her focus was singular, her spirit buoyed by the belief that justice wasn't a gift, it was a right, one she'd defend with every breath. She wasn't here to play a role, she was here to rewrite the script. Then Judge Harold Grayson entered, and the air shifted. He was a man who wore authority like armor, his presence a wall of certainty that demanded obedience. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, swept the room before landing on her. Pam met his gaze, unflinching, a quiet challenge in the tilt of her chin. She'd faced men like him before, men who thought power was a gavel and a robe. But she knew better. Power was in the fight, in the refusal to bend when the world expected you to break. Let's cut to the chase, Grayson said, his voice a blade slicing through the silence. The court has reviewed the matter. The defendant is in violation of Municipal Code 27C. A fine of $125,000 is imposed, effective immediately. The words landed like a thunderclap, sudden and merciless. No preamble, no debate, just a verdict dropped from on high. Pam's breath caught, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of it. She'd expected a discussion, a chance to lay out her case. Instead, she'd been handed a guillotine. The room held its breath. The city attorney blinked, surprised but silent. The spectators, lawyers, clerks, a few curious souls, shifted in their seats, sensing the storm brewing. Pam's hands stilled on her papers, her mind racing behind a mask of calm. This wasn't a ruling, it was a dare, a test of whether she'd bow or rise. Inside, something ignited, not anger, but a fierce, radiant resolve. She'd spent years building a life on the belief that the law was a shield, not a weapon. Now it was being turned against her, and the weight of that betrayal stung. But it also lit a spark. She leaned forward, her voice steady as steel. Your Honor, with all due respect, I haven't been given the chance to speak. Grayson's eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise breaking his stony facade. The violation is clear, he said, dismissing her with a wave. The fine stands. Pam's lips curved, not into a smile, but something sharper, a promise. She wasn't shaken, she was stirred. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who'd ever stood in a courtroom and been silenced, every voice drowned by the gavel's echo. She glanced at her team, their eyes locked on her, a silent chorus of trust. She thought of the clients she'd fought for, the single mother facing eviction, the small business owner crushed by bureaucracy, people who'd taught her that justice wasn't a privilege, it was a lifeline. Pam Bondi didn't back down from fights. She turned them into triumphs. And this was no exception. "Then let's begin," she said, her words a quiet thunder of their own. Grayson thought he'd won before the battle started. He was wrong. Pam straightened, her heart pounding not with doubt, but with purpose. She wasn't here to accept defeat. She was here to redefine victory. Every eye in Courtroom C turned to her, drawn by the gravity of a woman who refused to let injustice have the last word. She'd come prepared for a hearing, but now she was ready for a war. And in that moment, Pam Bondi became more than a lawyer. She became a beacon, a living proof that when the system falters, one voice can still rise to mend it. Pam Bondi didn't flinch. She rose from her seat in Courtroom C, her presence a quiet storm gathering strength. Judge Harold Grayson had thrown down a gauntlet disguised as a ruling, and she wasn't about to let it lie. Her voice cut through the stillness, clear and unwavering. "Your Honor, if the law is as clear as you claim, why am I standing here without a chance to defend it?" The question hung in the air, a spark igniting the tension. She wasn't accusing, not yet, but she was daring him to justify the silence he'd imposed. Grayson leaned back, his gaze hard as granite. "Miss Bondi, this court doesn't entertain theatrics. The violation speaks for itself. Municipal Code 27C is ironclad. Your chance to speak doesn't change the facts." His tone was clipped, a man accustomed to ending debates before they began. But Pam caught the faintest crack in his armor, a twitch at the corner of his mouth. He wasn't as unshakable as he wanted her to believe. She stepped forward, her confidence a steady flame. "Facts? Let's talk facts, Your Honor. Code 27C has been contested 5 times in the last decade, 3 of those cases overturned for lack of due process. If it's ironclad, why does it keep buckling under scrutiny?" Her words were precise, each one a chisel chipping at his certainty. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. The strength was in her clarity, her unshaken belief that truth could pierce even the thickest shield of authority. The room stirred. In the back, a cluster of law students, wide-eyed and scribbling notes, leaned forward, their whispers a soft hum of awe. They weren't just watching a hearing, they were witnessing a masterclass. One of them, a young woman with a notebook clutched to her chest, mouthed "wow" to her neighbor. Pam didn't see it, but she felt it. The weight of their attention, the hope she was kindling in them. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was theirs too. Grayson's jaw tightened. "Those cases don't apply here," he snapped, his voice rising just enough to betray his unease. "This is a straightforward violation. $125,000, end of story. You're wasting the court's time." He gripped the bench, knuckles whitening, as if anchoring himself against her momentum. But Pam wasn't deterred. She tilted her head, studying him like a puzzle she'd already solved. "Wasting time?" she countered, her tone calm but edged with steel. "I'd argue the court's wasting its own integrity. Tell me, Your Honor, when did a fine become a verdict before a defense? I've got a story for you. Maybe it'll jog your memory about what this system's supposed to protect." She paused, letting the silence settle, her eyes sweeping the room. The students held their breath, even the city attorney froze, his pen hovering mid-air. "There was a woman I represented years ago," Pam began, her voice softening, but carrying a weight that pulled everyone in. "Maria. Single mom, 2 kids, barely scraping by. The city fined her $10,000 for a code violation she didn't even know existed. No notice, no hearing, just a bill she couldn't pay. She came to me crying not because of the money, but because no one would listen. I fought for her and we won. Not because I was loud, but because I was right. She got her voice back that day. So tell me, Your Honor, where's my voice now?" The room was electric. The students nodded, some scribbling furiously, others staring at Pam like she'd just lit a torch in the dark. Grayson shifted, his composure fraying. "That's a touching tale, Miss Bondi, but it's irrelevant. This isn't about sob stories. It's about the law." His words were sharp, but they lacked the bite of before. He was deflecting, and she knew it. "Is it?" Pam shot back, her gaze locking with his. "The law says I get a defense. The The law says evidence matters. If you're so sure of this violation, where's the proof? Or are we just taking your word for it? Her question was a blade, slicing through his bravado. She wasn't pleading, she was demanding. Demanding fairness, demanding reason, demanding the justice she'd sworn to uphold. Grayson's eyes narrowed. "You're treading on thin ice," he warned, his voice low and taut. "The court's discretion?" "Discretion isn't a free pass," Pam interrupted, her tone unwavering. "It's a responsibility. You want to fine me? Fine, but you don't get to skip the part where I prove you wrong. That's not how this works, not for me, not for Maria, not for anyone who's ever believed this system could be fair." Her words rang out, a clarion call that echoed in the hearts of everyone listening. The students erupted into hushed murmurs, their admiration palpable. One scribbled, "She's unstoppable," in the margin of his notes. Grayson's face darkened, but he couldn't hide the flicker of doubt. Pam stood tall, her resolve a beacon cutting through the haze of his authority. She wasn't fighting for herself alone, she was fighting for every soul the system had tried to mute. And she was just getting started. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady as a heartbeat, "if you think I'll sit down and take this, you've misjudged me. I'm here to remind you what justice looks like, not just for me, but for them." She nodded toward the students, the silent witnesses who'd carry this moment forward. Grayson glared, but his silence spoke louder than his words ever could. Pam had struck a chord, and the melody was hope, hope that one voice armed with truth could shift the tides of power. She adjusted her stance, ready for the next blow. Grayson might have the gavel, but Pam had the will. And in Courtroom C, that will was a flame no ruling could extinguish. The battle lines were drawn, and she was all in. Not out of pride, but out of a belief so deep it fueled her every word. Justice wasn't a gift to be granted. It was a right to be claimed. The air in Courtroom C crackled as Pam Bondi stood her ground, her words still echoing in the silence Judge Harold Grayson had tried to enforce. He wasn't done, though. His eyes flicked to the side door, and with a curt nod he signaled a shift that made Pam's pulse quicken. "Enter Judge Evelyn Carter." Senior, respected, a figure whose reputation carried the weight of decades. Grayson had called in reinforcements, and the room knew it. Pam's chest tightened, not from fear, but from the thrill of a challenge doubling in size. She wasn't facing one wall now, she was facing two, and she was ready to climb them both. Carter stepped in, her presence calm but commanding, her silver hair a crown of authority. She nodded at Grayson, a gesture of courtesy, not agreement. "Ms. Bondi," she said, her voice smooth yet firm, "I've been asked to join this proceeding. Judge Grayson believes your objections warrant a second perspective." Her tone held no hostility, but the implication was clear. Grayson wanted her to bolster his ruling, not question it. Pam caught the flicker in Carter's eyes, skepticism perhaps, and seized it like a lifeline. "Welcome, Your Honor," Pam replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. "I trust you're here for clarity, not just confirmation. Shall we dig into the evidence, or lack thereof?" The jab was subtle, but it landed. Grayson's face tightened, his patience fraying. "Enough games, Miss Bondi," he snapped. "The fine stands. Judge Carter's here to affirm that." Carter raised a hand, cutting him off. "I'm here to listen, Harold. Let's hear her out." Her words were a quiet rebuke, and Pam's heart leapt, not from relief, but from the crack she'd just been handed. She turned to Grayson, her gaze unflinching. "If we're skipping evidence, let's bring in the man who started this. Officer James Torres. Where's your proof?" Torres, a wiry municipal enforcer with a clipboard under his arm, rose from the back. He strode to the stand, swearing in with the confidence of someone who rarely faced pushback. Pam didn't waste a second. "Officer Torres," she began, her tone crisp, "you issued this violation. What did you see that justifies $125,000? Torres straightened, unfazed. "The property broke Code 27C. I saw it myself. Non-compliance. Plain as day." "Did you?" Pam pressed, stepping closer. "Show me the photos. Show me the report. Show me anything beyond your word." Torres blinked, his certainty wavering. "I didn't need photos," he said, his voice thinning. "I've been doing this 15 years. I know a violation when I see one." Pam's lips curved into a razor-sharp smile. 15 years, and you didn't learn evidence matters? That's not experience, that's assumption. What? Grayson slammed his gavel. Ms. Bondi, you're out of line. Officer Torres's testimony is sufficient. Pam spun to face him, her voice rising with controlled fire. Sufficient for who? Not for the law, not for due process. You want to lean on his word, fine, but don't pretend it's justice. Carter tilted her head, her silence louder than Grayson's outburst. Pam seized the moment. Your Honors, this isn't just about me, it's about Tampa, about people crushed by fines they can't fight. I'd like the court's permission to bring in voices you haven't heard. Grayson's eyes widened. What voices? He demanded, his tone a mix of irritation and disbelief. Pam didn't blink. Community volunteers. Everyday folks who face this same system. They're outside, ready to testify about vague codes and unchecked power. Let them speak. The room erupted into murmurs. The law students in the back exchanged glances, one whispering, "She's changing the game." Carter's brow lifted, intrigued. Grayson, though, was livid. This is a courtroom, not a town hall. I won't allow it. Why not? Pam shot back, her words a challenge wrapped in hope. If you're ruling so solid, what's the harm in hearing them? Or are you afraid they'll prove what I already know, that 27C is a house of cards? Grayson's face reddened. You're pushing me, Bondi, he growled, and you'll regret it. Pam met his glare unshaken. I'd regret it more if I stayed quiet. The law doesn't bend for convenience, it stands for people. Let them in. Carter interjected, her voice cutting through the fray. Harold, she's got a point. If the statute's clear, testimony won't hurt it. I'd like to hear these voices. Grayson's jaw clenched, but he couldn't overrule her. Not publicly. Fine, he spat. 5 minutes. That's it. Pam nodded, her pulse racing with a mix of nerves and exhilaration. She signaled her team and the door swung open. In walked 6 volunteers. Teachers, shop owners, parents. The heartbeat of Tampa. Their faces glowed with pride, their steps firm despite the weight of the moment. A woman in her 50s, Clara, spoke first. I got fined $8,000 last year. No warning, no appeal. It nearly broke me. Pam's fighting for us, not just her. A man, Javier, followed. Code 27C hit my store. No evidence, just a ticket. We deserve better. Their words hit like waves, each one eroding Grayson's stance. The students scribbled furiously, inspired. Carter listened, her expression unreadable but attentive. Grayson gripped his gavel, his control slipping. Pam turned to Torres. You hear that? That's what your plain as day does. Where's your proof now? Torres stammered. I followed protocol. Pam shook her head. Protocol without evidence is a guess, and guesses don't hold up. Not here. She faced the bench, her voice soaring. Your Honors, this fine isn't law. It's a gamble. If you let it stand, you're betting against every person in this room. I'm not here to lose that bet. Grayson pounded his gavel again. Enough. We're taking a recess. His voice shook, a man rattled by a tide he couldn't stop. Carter said nothing, but her eyes lingered on Pam. Respect, maybe even admiration. The volunteers stood taller, their pride a quiet victory. Pam exhaled, her heart pounding with the thrill of turning the tables. She'd cracked the facade, and the community's voice was her hammer. Grayson could retreat, but she wasn't done, not by a long shot. The second recess ended, and Courtroom C buzzed with anticipation as Judge Harold Grayson returned, his steps heavier than before. Pam Bondi stood at the defendant's table, her posture steady, her heart a drumbeat of quiet resolve. 2 breaks hadn't dulled her edge, they'd sharpened it. Judge Evelyn Carter followed, her presence a calm anchor beside Grayson's storm. The volunteers sat in the gallery, their eyes bright with faith. The law students clutched their notebooks, hanging on every moment. Pam felt their belief in her, a current lifting her higher. She wasn't just fighting for herself now, she was carrying their hopes too. Grayson cleared his throat, his voice stiff, like a man swallowing a bitter pill. Ms. Bondi, this court has reconsidered the matter. The pause was telling, a crack in his armor he couldn't hide. The evidence, or lack thereof, doesn't meet the threshold for enforcement under Code 27C. The fine is lifted. The words landed soft but seismic, a victory born not from thunder, but from the steady drip of truth Pam had wielded like a chisel. She exhaled, a wave of relief washing over her, not for the money, but for what it meant. She'd turned a wall into a door. The room erupted, the volunteers leapt to their feet, clapping with a joy that echoed off the walls. Clara, the teacher, hugged Javier, tears glistening in her eyes. The law students joined in, their applause a chorus of awe and inspiration. One shouted, "That's justice!" and the others laughed, their voices a melody of belief renewed. Pam's team surrounded her, their smiles wide, their hands on her shoulders, a silent thank you for leading them to this moment. She felt it all, the lightness, the pride, the electric hum of a room alive with possibility. Grayson sat back, his face a mask of reluctance. "Court adjourned," he muttered, his gavel striking with less force than before. He avoided Pam's gaze, but she didn't need his acknowledgement. His retreat was enough. Carter, though, leaned forward, her voice cutting through the celebration. "Ms. Bondi, a word before you go." Pam turned, meeting her eyes. "You've got a rare gift," Carter said, her tone warm with respect, "not just for the law, but for people. Don't let it go to waste." Pam nodded, a swell of gratitude rising in her chest. Carter didn't just see her win, she saw her why. The crowd spilled into the hall, but Pam lingered. She caught the students' eager stares, the volunteers' grateful nods. This wasn't the end, it was the beginning. "Hey!" she called out, her voice bright. "Anyone up for a quick talk? Right here, right now!" The students grinned, scrambling to form a semicircle. The volunteers joined, their faces alight with curiosity. Pam stood among them, no podium, no pretense, just a woman who'd fought and won, ready to share the fire that fueled her. "I didn't do this alone," she started, her words simple but rich with feeling. "You, students, volunteers, my team, you were my strength today. This win isn't mine, it's ours." Clara wiped her eyes, nodding. A student, a young man with glasses, raised his hand. "How do you keep going when it's this hard?" Pam smiled, her heart full. "You don't give up because it's hard, you keep going because it matters. I saw a single mom lose everything to a fine like this once. She didn't quit, neither did I." Courage isn't loud, it's steady, and it's in every one of you. The group leaned in, hanging on her words. Javier spoke up, his voice thick with pride. "You gave us a voice today, Pam. Tampa's better for it." She shook her head, humble but firm. "You had the voice, I just turned up the volume. This city's strength is in people like you, standing up when it counts." The students scribbled notes, one whispering to another, "She's the real deal." Pam caught it and laughed, a sound of pure, unfiltered joy. "You're the real deal too," she said. "Take this moment and run with it. The law's only as good as the people who fight for it." The talk stretched on, a tapestry of questions and stories. A student asked about fear. Pam admitted she'd felt it, but let it fuel her instead of freeze her. Clara shared how the volunteers planned to spread the word, to teach others their rights. The air hummed with connection, a community forged in the heat of one woman's stand. Pam watched them, her chest swelling with a pride deeper than victory, a pride in what they'd built together. Carter lingered at the door, observing. She caught Pam's eye and gave a small nod, a silent salute from one fighter to another. Grayson was gone, his absence a shadow that couldn't dim the light filling the room. Pam's team packed up, their chatter lively, their spirits soaring. She joined them, but not before turning back to the group. "Keep pushing," she said, her voice a beacon. "Today's not the end, it's the spark. Let's make it burn bright." They cheered, a sound that followed her into the hall. Pam walked out, her steps light, her mind buzzing with what came next. She'd won more than a case. She'd redefined justice, not with anger but with hope. The volunteers saw a future where their voices mattered. The students saw a path worth walking. And Pam? She saw a Tampa where the law could lift, not crush. Relief mingled with purpose, a quiet thrill at knowing this moment would echo beyond these walls. As she stepped into the afternoon, the applause still rang in her ears, a song of unity, of faith restored. She didn't gloat, she glowed. This wasn't about proving Grayson wrong. It was about proving something right. Justice wasn't a gavel's echo, it was a community's heartbeat. And today, Pam Bondi had made it beat louder than ever. The echoes of applause faded as Pam Bondi gathered her things in Courtroom C, but the energy lingered, a quiet hum in her bones. She was about to step into the hall when Judge Evelyn Carter's voice stopped her. "Pam, a moment?" The senior judge stood near the bench, her silver hair catching the light, her eyes steady with something deeper than formality. Pam turned, her heart still buoyant from the win, yet grounded by the weight of what it meant. Carter didn't waste words. "You're exceptional," she said, her tone rich with sincerity. "Not just today, but what you stand for. People will notice, more than you think. Be ready." Pam blinked, a flush of warmth rising in her chest. "Thank you, Your Honor," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "I just did what felt right." Carter smiled, a rare, genuine curve of her lips. "That's why it matters. But mark my words, you're a symbol now. Change follows people like you." The warning wasn't ominous, it was a torch passed, a quiet charge to keep running. Pam nodded, humbled yet ignited. She didn't crave the spotlight, but if it shone, she'd use it to light the way for others. She stepped outside, the Tampa air sharp and alive against her skin. The victory wasn't just hers. It was a seed, and she could feel it taking root. Her mind raced, not with pride but with possibility. She thought of Clara's tears, Javier's resolve, the students' eager questions. This couldn't end here. It wouldn't. Pam stopped, turning to her team huddled nearby. "What if we didn't just walk away?" she asked, her voice alight with purpose. "What if we built something for Tampa?" They grinned, catching her spark. "Like what?" one asked. Pam's answer came swift and sure. "A community initiative. Teach people their rights. Show them how to fight. Let's turn this win into their strength." The idea blossomed fast. Within days, Pam was back in the community, not as a lawyer in a suit, but as a neighbor with a mission. She rented a small room at the local library, gathered the volunteers, and invited anyone who'd listen. Know Your Rights became the rallying cry, a series of workshops, free and open, where she broke down the law in ways that clicked. Clara taught a session on speaking up. Javier shared tips for small businesses. The students came too, their notebooks swapped for megaphones as they spread the word. Pam watched it grow, her heart swelling with a hope so fierce it felt like flight. One evening, a teenage girl approached her after a session, her voice shy but steady. "I want to be like you someday. You made me believe I could." Pam's throat tightened, not from ego, but from the echo of her younger self in those words. "You already are," she said, resting a hand on the girl's shoulder. "You're here. That's where it starts." The girl beamed, and Pam saw a ripple stretching far beyond this room, into a future where kids like her wouldn't just survive the system, but shape it. Carter's words haunted her in the best way, a symbol for change. Pam didn't want statues or headlines, she wanted impact. Every workshop, every handshake, every thank you from a stranger fueled her. She'd face Grayson's gavel and won, but this was the real triumph. She'd turned a courtroom battle into a movement, a legacy not carved in stone, but written in lives. The law wasn't just rules to her, it was a promise, a tool for lifting up, not tearing down. As she locked the library door one night, Pam paused, her reflection faint in the glass. She saw a woman who'd fought not for glory, but for good. "Justice isn't a verdict," she whispered to herself, her breath fogging the pain. "It's what we do with it." She smiled, small and sure, then stepped into the dark, her faith stronger than ever. This was her call, to inspire, to act, to prove that one stand could spark 1,000. And to anyone listening, she'd say, "You've got that power too? Use it." Pam Bondi's journey in Courtroom C teaches us a timeless truth. Justice isn't a gift handed down. It's a flame we must tend with courage and conviction. Her stand against an unfair system wasn't just a win for her. It was a beacon for anyone who's ever felt silenced. The lesson? Power doesn't belong to those who wield it loudest, but to those who wield it righteously. Today, in a world of quick judgments and louder voices, Pam's story urges us to pause, question, and act. Whether it's challenging a workplace rule, advocating for a neighbor, or simply speaking up when it counts, one voice can shift a tide, and that voice could be yours. If this tale stirred you, hit that subscribe button. Your support fuels more stories like this, stories that inspire, uplift, and ignite change. Let's keep the fire burning together.